very excited to see TJ Dillashaw back. Before he was suspended, before he was popped for PEDs, I was a huge fan of his style, and and I was supporting him all the way, man, until that moment. Then he had to admit that he was using PEDs. But yeah, I think this fight is the fight to make, just because what had happened in the Sterling and Yan fight that kind of delayed everything for TJ Dillashaw. It's really seemed like that the UFC wanted him to slide in and fight for the title immediately. And I was on the side of, he needed to earn it, man, because he did come off the suspension, and he's been out for like 2.5 years almost. So I don't understand how you could be out for 2.5 years and then get an immediate title switch and coming off a suspension by USADA. But yeah, this fight, I think it all worked out for even Cory Sandhagen too. This is the big matchup that he needs, what I mean? And I think it's a huge opportunity for him.
I'm with you there. I said this the second TJ Dillashaw was reinstated. It was that he should not get a title shot. I mean, if you get busted for PEDs, you should not be rewarded with a title shot. I know technically he didn't lose his bantamweight title, but I don't care. It's the rules, man. If you're cheating, you shouldn't be rewarded with the title shot. So good call in the UFC. I do wonder what would have happened, like I said, if had say Yan or Sterling decisively won. I do wonder if they were going to slide TJ in there. Thankfully, they didn't. I think this was the fight I said they should have made. The second Cory Sandhagen beat Frankie Edgar. It makes a lot of sense. Sandhagen, unfortunately, is in a weird spot himself, because while he has back-to-back impressive wins, probably the best 2 wins you're going to find in the UFC this year are Cory Sandhagen's wins. He still does have that quick loss to Aljamain Sterling last year. So, unless it was Yan, let's say Sterling won clean, I think it would have been a tough sell to give him that rematch right away, although I think the scenario works out quite well with him having to fight Dillashaw. 3 contenders, that makes more than enough sense in the matchup. So, Mike, if we want to bring up the TJ Dillashaw tail of the tape, if we can, or anything that Dillashaw has not fought since January 2019. It actually feels like he's been out longer because it was so early in the year, right? So, we're taking a look here at the stats, UFC stats, which is great here. So it's been a bit since he's been in the cage. The Henry Cejudo fight was the last one he had. It's the first time Dillashaw had been knocked out in a fight since the John Dodson fight in December of 2011. So Dillashaw pretty durable for the most part. I think the big question here that we can't really answer, and we can speculate, but how long was TJ Dillashaw using steroids? I mean, he was busted for steroids. He got, obviously was using them, but how long has this been? So you do have to question now a lot of those wins, the Cody Garbrandt wins, the John Lineker wins, the Rafael Sunsao wins, all those wins you have to look at, in my opinion. So that's what makes this interesting, because I'll be honest, JHK, if Dillashaw didn't get busted for, let's say it wasn't a case where he was popped for steroids and he lost decisively and he was out for 2 years, I'd probably be picking TJ Dillashaw here. I think on paper, from what we've seen in the octagon, he's the better fighter. But if he was using, we might see a completely different fighter. And I'm not going to mention any other fighters, but John, we have seen certain fighters when they come back off a steroid suspension, they just don't look the same. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree that we don't know what to expect from TJ Dillashaw. Are we going to see? Did he find some new things? You know what I mean? That's another question too, heading into this, the next stage of his career is like, because have you seen him? Have you seen his pictures recently?
Yeah.
And I just watched the interview with him and Brett Okamoto, and he was talking about he got up to 168 pounds solid muscle. How do you do that? I know he got some science behind it, but it's the smell test, man. That's iffy right there.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to, I would assume he's not going to risk doing anything dumb again, because that would ban him for life. It's one thing to get, and the thing is, he got busted for like a high level of things as well. It was EPO, I believe. So that takes a lot of it. Here's the other intangible. This is what we like to talk about heading into a fight like this. Dillashaw had a lot of injuries. One of the things that did come out after the Cejudo fight was he needed some serious work. I believe it was on his shoulder. And so in some ways, that could be a benefit to Dillashaw that he's healthier. Not to use, maybe this isn't the greatest example, but it reminds me a bit like, thinking of someone like, say, even someone like Jim Miller. There's a good example. He had Lyme disease, right? He didn't know he had Lyme disease. He got it fixed. We've seen Jim Miller look a lot differently since then. I know that's a disease as opposed to an injury, but you get what I'm saying. With certain fighters, if they have a nagging injury that they've been using for a while and it gets fixed, sometimes they look better. So we'll see if that plays a role. We don't have the answers to that, but it is an intangible heading into the fight. The other intangible as well is that these two used to train together. We've seen training partners fight again, against each other. Rashad Evans, John Jones, more recent example, Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns. How much do you think that's going to play into the fight of, I'm sure in the back of someone's head, we don't know who that is, someone got the better of them in that training, right?
Yeah. I'm thinking it's going to play a major factor in this fight. And you've spoken to TJ multiple times, you've asked him about, or not TJ, Cory, and
Sandhagen, yeah.
you've asked him about the, training with TJ. And one thing that, is interesting to me is that Cory has been wanting to fight TJ for a while. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it kind of shows you that Cory does have some confidence, coming from those exchanges and training with TJ in the past. And, from what I heard, he was helping him for the Brow fight. He was helping him for the Cruz fight. And they were flying him in. Sean Madden was even with him. So Sean Madden gave, I did an interview with him like a couple months ago, and he was talking about, the intense, like sparring sessions that they would have, during those, during those times. So I think it's going to play a major factor. I think Cory knows something that we don't know, and then we're going to find that out when they fight.
Might as well, good time to bring up Cory Sandhagen in terms of any sort of stats we can bring up with him, because the one thing with Cory in this fight is that he's going to have a height and reach advantage. So TJ Dillashaw, for those who don't know, 35 years old, 5'6" with a 68-inch reach. Cory Sandhagen, 28 years old, so he's younger, 5'11", he's taller, and he's got a 70-inch reach as opposed to Dillashaw, who was a 68-inch reach. So 2-inch reach advantage there for Cory Sandhagen as well. The other thing we got to bring up, and I really, I've done a lot of interviews with Cory, and, appreciate the shout out there, John. But if you want to hear a really good interview with Cory Sandhagen, one that's better than mine, I'll fully admit it, was the interview he did with Joe Rogan. Joe talked to him about what changed after the Aljamain Sterling loss. And, Sandhagen kind of alluded to a bit of, just being a little too comfortable in there. And he said how he had to sort of change his mentality. And they work a lot in that camp on the mental side of the game. I know Elliot Marshall does a lot of visualization with a lot of the fighters there in the gym. And we've certainly seen that, because I think Sandhagen looks a lot different than we saw prior to him fighting Aljamain Sterling. We see a lot more urgency. We see him sort of going in for the kill. If you remember early on in his career, in his UFC career especially, I mean, he's taken guys like John Lineker to a split decision. He's taken a Sun Tzu to a decision as well. Now we're seeing him finish fights against higher level competition. Why is that? I think a lot of that is the change in mentality as well. So that's where things are going to get interesting in this fight, because I'll be honest, like, I don't even think we've seen the best Cory Sandhagen yet. He's still 29. I think there's a possibility of him potentially, being an even better version than we've seen before. We talked about the lack of activity with Dillashaw. So this is always something I like bringing up. So since Dillashaw's last fight, which was January 2019, Cory Sandhagen has fought. Let's even include that fight that Sandhagen had early, because he fought Mario Batista in January 19th, 2019. Dillashaw fought Cejudo on the same card, actually, which I didn't even realize that. That's interesting. So same card, they both fought together. Since then, Cory Sandhagen has fought 5 times. That's crazy. Like, think how much of a difference that is in terms of what Dillashaw. So Sandhagen's been in those 5 fights. We've seen not only Sandhagen become a different fighter, but he's been very active. I mean, to fight 5 times since the beginning of 2019 during a pandemic of all times is pretty impressive. So how much do you think the activity will play in a role in this as well, John?
The activity is key, man. Experience is key, and the loss that he sustained against Aljamain Sterling is key for him as in his development. Like you said, mentally he's different. A lot of people point to like the wins against Moraes and Edgar. Moraes he's chinny, he's getting a little bit older. He has a lot of fights. And then they'll look at Edgar and say, Edgar's 39 years old and he's declining. But you know what, though? I think it's a perfect storm for Cory Sandhagen, to be honest with you, coming off the Aljamain Sterling fight where he could gain confidence, get into this flow state against guys that are veterans, guys that, are big names in the division and build this momentum. And I think that building this momentum is key for Cory Sandhagen heading into this fight against TJ Dillashaw.
The other interesting thing, and I just did a quick scan of Dillashaw's past opponents, Sandhagen by far is the biggest opponent he's fought in terms of height and reach, which should be interesting, because some fighters, they thrive on it. Maybe it's an easier target to hit. For others, they struggle. I mean, we've seen fights where a fighter sort of towers over the other one in different divisions. So we'll see if that plays a role as well. But yeah, I think it's interesting because, like I said, Dillashaw, there's just so many questions heading in here with the PED use, with the layoff, with the fact that he's 35, right? Like, typically, unless it's heavyweight, usually fighters, when they get into their mid-30s, they tend to regress a bit. So we'll have to see how that sort of plays out as well. All right. I think it's probably time for us to get to our pick. John, which way are you leaning in this fight?
I'm going to have to go with Cory Sandhagen in this fight. He's got the youth. He's got the size. And when you look at TJ Dillashaw's loss, the last loss before the Henry Cejudo fight, who did he lose to? Dominic Cruz. And Dominic Cruz a little bit longer, a little bit taller, kind of a similar style, right? Cory's a little bit more advanced. He's like the new 2022 version of that. But man, I just look at Cory Sandhagen as, like I said earlier, the momentum is there. He's very confident. You know, he's a guy that's not going to tell you about it. He's going to go do it in the cage. And yeah, the confidence there, I see it in the cage. The striking, the ground. He has everything to beat TJ Dillashaw. And there's too many questions with TJ. There's the age, like you said, 35. He's coming off both his surgeries on his shoulders, right? How do we know how his shoulders are going to have, hold up in an actual fight where he's going 120% in that cage? Will they pop out? You know what I mean? Because he said in previous interviews that his shoulders would pop out like in training camp. So we don't know if his shoulders are 100%. Yeah, there's too many questions for TJ Dillashaw heading into this fight. Even though I love TJ Dillashaw and his fighting style, I think Cory goes in there and has that performance, has that highlight reel performance against one of the biggest names in the history of the division, and he's going to get that title shot.
There's a couple other things I wanted to mention before I give my pick, but the Cejudo knockout loss, we do have to point out that I'm sure the weight cut played a role in him getting finished in that fight because of the fact that he cut a lot. I mean, you talked about him being 168 now. Like, imagine him trying to fight at flyweight now. Like, I don't even think that's possible. You'd have to, and he was obviously juicing to do that. So just think of how much harm he did to his body just going through that process to get down. That could also be something against him as well, just how much that took out of him, not only getting knocked out, but also making that really drastic cut as well. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind with the matchup as well. The other thing we got to mention is that Sandhagen, a bit of a slight favorite on a lot of the lines I'm seeing. Dillashaw, the underdog, coming in. So that is interesting. Maybe if you're Dillashaw believers, if you feel like he's going to come out and look like the old Dillashaw, it might be worth a stab there. But I just don't know how TJ Dillashaw is going to win this fight. Typically, if you look at his wins, the Garbrandt wins were knockouts, right? Sandhagen never been knocked out in his career. He was submitted by Aljamain Sterling. I can't remember if that was a knockdown and then he got submitted, but either way, Sandhagen has shown that he's got a pretty good chin. He's taken some shots from John Lineker, who hits pretty hard, so I would think his chin's going to hold up in this fight. It's possible he could, outpoint him like he did against, say like a Renan Barão or, even when he fought John Lineker as well himself. That's another thing that we could look at that maybe could outstrike, Cory Sandhagen. But I don't think that's going to happen here because, like I said, Sandhagen is going to be the taller, bigger fighter here. So I think this fight ends one of two ways. I think Sandhagen either knocks out Dillashaw. Maybe it is a case of, that he's done too much harm to his body with the steroids, the layoff, the age, all that, and he gets finished. And like we've seen with Sandhagen, he's knocking guys out that don't typically get knocked out. When Marlon Moraes got knocked out, Marlon Moraes had not been knocked out a ton prior to that. Frankie Edgar, I mean, we're talking about one of the most durable guys in the UFC. Yes, he's taken a lot of damage, and yes, he was knocked out, I think, a couple fights before with Ortega and Korean Zombie. But Max Holloway took this guy to a decision recently. He also, that was the only time he's ever been finished at bantamweight. Even Pedro Munoz, the guy who was knockout power himself, could not finish Frankie Edgar. So I put that flying knee knockout win for Sandhagen in very high regard, and who's to say he can't do it here? So my pick in this fight is going to be either Cory Sandhagen in a really tough, decision, but I think a decisive decision, not a fight where you're going to be like, ooh, who won that? Or I see him getting an early finish over TJ as well if he comes out guns a-blazing and does it quite well. And to be honest, if I had to guess, I'd say TJ probably did have the better of them in the training just at the time because they were training years ago. I don't think Sandhagen is the fighter we're seeing now. So I think it probably was possible that TJ had that, but that might be some false confidence as well with the fact that he was using maybe back then. And that's something as well where Cory sort of knows that. And he's like, look, I trained with this guy when he was, using, and now I'm getting, now I'm way better than I was before. Also, I have a clip on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/LynchOnSports, where I asked Cory about this. I said, look, I don't want to get anyone in trouble here, but what's your take on the whole, if TJ was using, did you ever see him use? He said flat out, and he gave a pretty good answer here, and I'll give him credit. He basically said that he has no proof. He's never seen anything of TJ using, but he says that if you're using something that specific, it's probably not the first time you've used it. So take that answer for what it's worth, but I would not feel comfortable picking TJ Dillashaw here. I feel very comfortable picking Cory Sandhagen in this fight.
Was that before Icarus came out?
When did they train together? It must have been because it was during the Muscle Farm days. It must have been before. I feel like
he was
before.
Yeah, he was flying out to
here,
Team Alpha Male too. I think these coaches, they know each other so well. They all live in pretty much the same area. You know what I mean? And they've worked with each other multiple times in the past. I think that makes it also interesting too because they know each other so well, even the coaches.
One other thing I'll mention, and we've already given our picks here, and we'll get into that, but what about Dwayne Ludwig here? I do wonder about this because I know Dwayne, I believe he's still based in Colorado. I'm sure he has ties to that gym at Elevation Fight Team as well, just with, Colorado's a very, and you know this, John, they're all very, a lot of them kind of cross train together. They all work together. There's a lot of respect there. Like I know Factory X guys that I'll talk to them and they'll be like, yeah, I'm rooting for Cory Sandhagen, or I'm rooting for guys from other gyms. There's a camaraderie there. I do wonder where Dwayne Ludwig feels on all this, because I'm sure Dwayne worked with Cory at some point. How's that going to go? And the other thing I saw a bit of chatter on social media, I don't know if you saw this, but there were some rumblings about TJ Dillashaw having some spies in Sandhagen's camp, like people that were recording. I read some thread on this. I don't know if that's true. I'll ask Cory about that the next time I speak to him, but I did read a thread about that I guess some new students were coming into the gym and they started filming and people were like, what the heck? And then they realized they had ties to Dillashaw. So we'll see. I mean, look, I think, by the way, TJ is handling this perfectly. I like the fact that he went after Aljo after the whole DQ thing, because here's the thing with TJ Dillashaw. He's playing the villain role up, and he should, because no matter what, for the rest of his life, people are going to call him a cheater, and that's not going to go away. You're never going to be this baby face. You're never going to win people over. It's very rare that you get busted for steroids and people like you. Brian Ortega is maybe the exception to the rule. I think people even forget that Ortega got busted for PEDs, right? But that's just because he's such a likable guy and whatever. But with Dillashaw, it's going to stay forever. They had the whole snake thing with Alpha Male. Like, he's playing this villain thing up as well. So I think he's playing this perfectly as well. And if that is true about the people in the camp, even if that's something he just made up, it's adding more to the fight, I think. And it's just such a good fight. I love this matchup. I think it's really awesome there.
There's also rumors going around that when TJ brought in Cory got the best of TJ over at Team Alpha Male. There's rumors going around like that too. I don't know if it's like 100% true or not, but I've heard those rumors going around.
Okay, because see, I just assumed that because Dillashaw was competing at a high level back then and Cory was sort of still, sort of working his way up, that Dillashaw might have been the better guy, but I wouldn't be surprised either. Cory, I mean, there's certain guys in the gym that just, sometimes you don't see the best in the cage, and maybe Cory was good back then, but maybe he wasn't showing it in the cage. We don't know, right? So that's interesting as well. Let's get to our first question again. There it says, would a dominant win from TJ or Sandhagen be enough to leapfrog Jan in the fight for the belt? No, I don't think so. Well, okay, I shouldn't say that, and I'll get your thoughts on this in a second. If Dillashaw wins, that might complicate things, but Jan, they got to do that rematch. Just with everything that happened there, with the way it unfolded, that would be a really bad look on not only Aljamain Sterling, but also the UFC as well if they decided to go that route. I get it's a bigger fight than if Jan had competed. But yeah, I think the rematch has to happen next, but don't be surprised. I mean, we've seen some crazy stuff happen when it comes to title shots and matchups and all that. So I wouldn't put it past the UFC to pull a fast one here. By the way, I don't usually like to announce interviews before I do them, but I am going to be speaking to Aljamain Sterling later today. Keep your eye out for that on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Lynch on Sports under the UFC interviews playlist. Curious to get his thoughts on that exact scenario. I want to ask him. I mean, because he was pretty. I think I even mentioned that to Sterling before he fought Jan the first time. Was like, what do you think of Jan saying he'd be open to fighting Dillashaw to fight the winner, even though Dillashaw coming off the suspension? And Jan was like, yeah, I'll take it. It's a money fight. So, anyways, your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, that's an iffy one. You know what I mean? I do believe that logically you do have to have that rematch just because how everything played out. But Sterling seems like he doesn't want to sign the contract to do the rematch. So I guess they're going to wait until this fight and then to figure out like who's going to be next. Because if TJ wins this fight, they're going to probably give TJ the title shot. If Cory doesn't, most likely they're going to probably end up doing the rematch with Peter Yan. This is some rumblings I've heard too. You know what I mean? Like after that fight, like they weren't committed to a rematch right away. So we'll see what happens.
We got a quick thing from our producer here. I'm just going to read this here. Yeah, so we actually have an article here. I'm going to read this quote. It's from TJ Dillashaw, and this is why Mike's the best, man. Love this guy, man. Shout out to Mike. He's good. The quote is, "We got kids like one of my buddies, Cory Sandhagen, that I train with now at Muscle Farm in Colorado." This is an old quote. When is the article from? I'm going to check the date on here. The article.
Did you put it up on the screen, Mike?
No, he's got it in the chat here. I'm just going to read it right now. So yeah, bear with me. I'll do my best TJ Dillashaw impression. We got kids like one of my buddies, Cory Sandhagen, that I train. No, I'm not going to do that. That I train with now at Muscle Farm in Colorado. He'll get the better of me, and he's not been in the UFC yet, but he'll be a great fighter. And damn, if he can't beat this guy, what's going on? So this is an earlier quote when they trained together at Muscle Farm of TJ Dillashaw, already acknowledging the greatness of Cory Sandhagen. So that's interesting. So forget what I said earlier. I mean, obviously TJ knows that this guy is very good. So I mean, that was from years ago at Muscle Farm. Muscle Farm doesn't even exist anymore. So what do you think of that, John? I mean, it's something you kind of alluded to here in the podcast today.
Well, TJ's been he's been praising
Sandhagen.
Cory for a while, I believe. Like that's what he said in the interview with Brett Okamoto. Like, I've trained with him extensively. I've been praising him. I knew that he was gonna become somebody. Maybe he didn't know at that time, but I knew that he's a great fighter. And that's just him showing you, you know what I mean? Like he's a great fighter. Does that mean that, Cory was dominating TJ? I don't think so. I think TJ was just giving him a compliment and trying to build, pump him up a little bit.
This is a great question here from Ben Gordon, not the basketball player, but he says, who wins in a straight kickboxing match, TJ or Sandhagen?
Man, that's a tough question.
Again, the problem is we don't know if we're going to see the TJ of old. We don't. We literally can't answer that. I have no idea. Maybe we do. If we do, then maybe it's close. Maybe TJ could do it. But I would think with the height and reach, Cory's got the advantage there, even in a kickboxing match.
Let's say since we're a fantasy, Fanatics fantasy MMA
yeah.
app, let's play some fantasy. Like let's say we get the TJ that we got, that
of
fought,
old. The one that let's say the one that fought Garbrandt, right?
Garbrandt, yeah. Let's say we got TJ that fought Garbrandt, which was probably one of the best versions of any fighter we've ever seen in our lifetime, right? And if he goes in there as that TJ against Cory, then the pick is different for me. To be honest with you, the pick is completely different. You know what I mean? I would pick TJ because I feel like that guy was hitting all cylinders. You know what I mean? And Sandhagen is still kind of like raising up right now, up the ranks a little bit, even though he's at the top of the division. So yeah, in a straight kickboxing match, if we got the old TJ, I would still take TJ. Or yeah, TJ. I would take TJ.
So that's interesting. I don't know where I'd lean on that one because the thing there's still, believe it or not, even after those 2 wins, there's still some question marks on Sandhagen. As I've just gone on this whole thing talking about how great Sandhagen is, he's been finishing his fights a bit early too. So it's like we don't know. Like let's say it goes later. Like how's Cory going to handle that? Dillashaw has that championship experience. It's something we haven't talked about. Is like, can Sandhagen go like 5 rounds if it needs to go in that level? We know Dillashaw can go that far. The early fights with Barao, he was, firing on all cylinders, even in like the 4th round. So that's a question mark as well. I mean, this could be a fight too, because here's the thing, if Sandhagen loses this, let's say he gets knocked out or something, people are going to say, oh, well, those 2 fights were lucky. Maybe they were. I don't know, but I'm banking not. I mean, we've had 2 fights now where he's finished the guy decisively. I would think that that's an improvement. I think I would still take Cory in to answer your question though in the kickboxing match, but we'll see. We got the boss man James in the chat says, what has to happen for the general public to forgive Dillashaw? Does he need forgiveness? I think the only way he could do it is if he like did some crazy like PR tour or something where he went to like hospitals or like, I don't know. Like I think it's almost nearly impossible. MMA fans do not forget. They do not forgive. Like I'm trying to think of someone who's been popped for steroid, like even Jones, like he still has a ton of fans, man. And this guy's been popped a couple times, say what you want about the USADA issues or whatever, but like, he's still like, people still love that guy a lot. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there is one particular answer, but I'd say if I'm a betting man, I'd say the fans, the majority of fans will still not like TJ.
I don't think TJ cares.
Yeah.
That's the feeling I get too, is like TJ doesn't care. If you hate him, that's better for him. Because like you said, he's embracing the snake role. So might as well get as many haters as possible. The haters are going to want him to lose. So they're going to watch him fight so they could watch him lose. That's what they want. And that's what TJ wants. I don't think he needs to go and get forgiveness. Well, he does need to do it, but I don't think he cares about it anymore. Because if he did, I think he would have done it a long time ago. Why would he start now?
Yeah, he was off the whole time. Then he could have done this tour being like, hey, I'm going to go, talk to kids at their school about why you shouldn't take steroids. He wasn't doing any of that. So you're right. I think it's probably more of a case that he doesn't care. And I don't think the fans will ever be on his side, so to speak. We got a comment from Max here. He says, how do you make a case of Dillashaw winning this? I can't see him how he doesn't get smoked. I'm not, I mean, I think if he looks like the old Dillashaw, like if like I said, the one sort of way you could look at this fight is maybe the time off has benefited Dillashaw. Maybe he's going to look even better than he was. Let's say for argument's sake, devil's advocate's sake, that TJ Dillashaw was only using for that one fight. Okay. And let's say the Garbrandt fights he wasn't using and he looked outstanding. Okay. We'll assume that. We'll also assume that the time off has allowed him to heal his injuries and he's looked a lot better. That's how he could win, is that he could outstrike Cory Sandhagen, because in my opinion, he was one of the best strikers, not just in the bantamweight division, but maybe in the UFC in terms of what he was able to do without pointing his opponents. By the way, I also thought he beat Dominic Cruz when he fought him and lost that fight. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But I mean, That's I think the only way. But I mean, if we're looking at the stats, we're looking at history of MMA. A guy who's 35, off 2 years, off injuries, and was using steroids, it's probably not going to end well for him. That's my take. So, Max, I understand what you're saying, and I completely agree. But I think it could also be one of those cases where we'll have to see what happens. So,
another thing that I didn't get too far deep into earlier was his weight gain. Like he said he's 168 pounds, or he got up to 168 pounds, a solid muscle. And also for him, a guy that relies on a lot of movement, is that good for him to be that big and just be all muscle? I don't know. Like, would it have a fact? Would it play a factor in this fight coming up? It could. You know what I mean? If he's not moving as fluid as he did before, and are we gonna see the same style, TJ? Is he gonna change it up, or is he gonna be more wrestling based because he added some pounds? You know what I mean? Like, that's just some things that running through my mind with this fight, man. That's what makes this fight so interesting.